Dear students, today we are going to talk about biography of John Donne, one of the important metaphysical poets, famous for his love poems and metaphysical poems. So he was born in 1572 and died 1631. John Donne was born in 1572 in London, England. He is known as the founder of the metaphysical poets, a term created by Samuel Johnson, an 18th century English essayist, poet, and philosopher. The loosely associated group also includes George Herbert, Richard Crashaw, Andrew Marvell, and John Cleveland. So these were the people who propagated, who tried to give their message in a different form as compared to other poets of their age. Their poetry, their poems contained far-fetched similes and very far away comparisons which can't be understood easily uh, until unless the reader should have exerted some sort of effort on their behalf. They couldn't understand it. So, metaphysical, definitely, as the term is clear, we will talk about it in detail. One, that beyond physical boundaries, they went there in a different world they were. So, they have produced very beautiful literature, especially among them. John Donne is very famous and read all over the world. So here we see his early life. He was born into a Roman Catholic family. We know in English or in Christian we have two types of groups. There are Roman Catholics and Protestant. Milton was Protestant and John Donne was Roman Catholic. He belonged to Roman Catholic family and he was born on 22nd of Jan in 1572 in London, UK. His parents were John Donne, a wealthy Londoner, and Elizabeth Haywood. Thomas Moore, a famous Catholic martyr, was his grandfather. Unfortunately, his father died in 1576 when he was hardly 4 years old, leaving Elizabeth alone with the responsibility of bringing up young children. So he was an orphan child, and it was his mother who brought him up beautifully and a literary background and religious. So that's why we can see in his poetry, especially the color of religion too. His poems have religious poems are also there. After his father's demise or death, his mother remarried with a surgeon, Dr. John Simmons. Later, he became the Dean of St. Paul's. Unfortunately, she died in 1632. So here we see his earlier education, early years. So they were a bit tough. He was a fatherless child. As John belonged to a religious family, he was educated privately during his early years. Home education was common. I think it has been tradition all over the world, even in Islamic world, in Indian, or in a lot of other countries. For children, a lot of education, earlier education was given at their doorstep by their father, mother, or the learned persons of their home. And we can see a long list of scholars who were earlier educated at their home. So in 1583, he took admission at Hart Hall, Oxford University. There he studied for 3 years and left without graduation because of his Catholic beliefs. So he couldn't complete due to his beliefs and due to certain religious restraints, he left them. According to him, the oath of supremacy was against his beliefs. It was required for the completion of the degree, but still you can see that he earned his name and still he is famous, renowned all over the world. But he was very much determined so far as his system or set of beliefs was concerned. He even left, deserted his degree, couldn't complete it, and came out without getting degree. So later in 1591, he got admission in Thieves Inn Legal School in London to pursue his education. However, during and after his education, he spent much of his precious time on literature, travel, and pastime. So literature, it needs a lot of time. If you're free, if you are easy, you can study and then you can write. So he availed that time. He made his basics in literature. He studied and he traveled and got worldly experience by moving from one place to other. And all these things and reflections can be found later in his poetry. We can find it. In 1615, he was awarded an honorary doctorate from Cambridge University. So we can see his marital life too. His marital life, like many great persons, great writers, there are certain exceptions, few exceptions are there, but most of the time we can see the writers of great writers, leaders, the marital life, conjugal life is not successful, and he was definitely one of them. So John successfully established his diplomatic career by the age of 25. He secretly married and moved in 1601. He became the member of parliament later. The families disapproved of their marriage because it was secret. The family was definitely very highly religious type of family and did not receive any dowry from her parents. John was also sent to prison for a short period because it was against certain morals and ethics whatsoever. However, he was released shortly when their marriage was legally approved. It was just they did it without making certain legal underpinnings, requirements which are necessary for marriage, but that's why he has to suffer for that one. The couple had 12 children in 16 years of marriage, but only 10 survived. Unfortunately, his three children died before 10, leaving him in a state of acute despair that drove him into committing suicide. The death of his wife during childbirth in 1617 added more to his pain and misery. So we can see, so he had a lot of kids, but unfortunately the deaths of his children and again acute pains. So these were the things which drove him towards a certain committing suicide. And the death of his wife especially was again some sort of a shock for him. So his personal life or his domestic life was not happy go. It was full of miseries. It has a lot of problems, and later we can see in his poetry all these problems were reflected in different poems and verses. So we move towards his writing career as a poet. Although the world knows him as a great poet now, in Jacobean England he was famous for his powerful oratory sermons. So now we recognize that he has been a great poet because of his poetry, because of his lines which he wrote there. But in fact, in reality, at his life, he was also famous by writing speeches, oratory for fun of making speeches. He used to write a lot of speeches and which were applauded. After completing his education from Lincoln's Inn, he started working as a secretary to Sir Thomas Egerton in 1597. Unfortunately, he lost his position after his secret marriage. This incident threw him into the well of a financial crisis. So he has to face a lot of crises due to his secret marriage. He spent the next 14 years of his life seeking a respectable job and producing remarkable literary pieces, so such as Pseudo Martyr and Bathanatos. So these were certain things that he wanted to write and make his position, but due to his secret marriage, he has to suffer a lot. And next we can see his career, writing career, how does it developed. Later in 1615, he became the royal chaplain to James in the Church of England. And in 16, sorry, it is a mistake. It's 1621, not 1921, but it is a typographical mistake. He was appointed as a dean of St. Paul. He spent the next decade as a preacher and writer until his illness in the autumn of 1630. Despite expressing his ideas, emotions, and feelings in his work so well, he did not put any effort into publishing his work because he never wanted to earn through his words. So he was a different sort of a chap. He never intended to earn something out of his words, poetry. and fiction, whatever sermons, preaching, because he was a religious person. He was willing to serve humanity or religious grounds, on religious grounds for his religious pursuits and purposes. So that's why we can say he never thought of selling his words in the market and earn something. Throughout during his lifetime, his poetry circulated in manuscript among the circle of friends. So it was not published, though it was famous, it was renowned. People, his friends knew that it is something extraordinary, it's something to be published, but he never did it. However, his elegies and styles were likely produced in 1590s. So we see his style, what sort of writer he was, what sort of poet he was. We will talk about certain his poems, and in detail we will find that what sort of person he was. Despite facing challenges and grave losses in life, Donne added more variety to the world of literature with his mature intellectual ideas. However, his works were not published and acknowledged during his lifetime. So, just like Jane Austen, just like many other writers, who were not even given importance by the publisher at that time. Even initially, we can see Hardy faced a lot of hardships and problems in publishing their works. We can also see that he was not an exception in this case, one that his works were could not get published during his lifetime, so that he could have earned some sort of repute and respect. However, Shakespearean work, though, we can see he got a lot of respect and earned a lot of repute in his lifetime. So he was different one. Instead, his highly intellectualized pieces were considered crude. So they thought that his works is not good. It's crude one. It's not refined one. It's not publishable one. However, after his death, he was termed a pioneer of the metaphysical school of thought. So later he was considered that he has done something extraordinary. So whenever we talk about metaphysical school of thought, the person who is the writer, the poet who is on the top, it's John Donne. His poetry is marked by subtlety and complexity of thought, excessive use of paradoxes, distorted imagery, and bold conceits. So these are the things which couldn't be found in other poets. It's not easy to make meaning, to understand, to make out what he wrote there, because the reader has to put a lot of effort to understand that what sort of imagery is there, opposite things are there. So that's why there was also criticism on his that ideas yoked by violence like that one. So a lot of criticism is also there. So certain people call that his work is a crude, not refined one. But later, with the passage of time, people recognize that this is something new, this is something extraordinarily important one. Also, he's famous for using harsh tone and rigid expression in his writings. The recurring themes in most of his poems stand religion, fidelity, the interconnectedness of humanity, death, separation, self-love. So these are certain things which have been presented through excessive use of, we can say, conceits have been used, subtlety of expression, excessive use of paradoxes, imageries of not very easy one. It couldn't be easily understood. It needs a lot of effort on behalf of readers. Then it's possible that people can understand it. So Johnston's now, impacts on future literature. John Donne is a well known metaphysical writer who became popular among his contemporaries. However, his writing faded away after his death until the 20th century, when some writers applauded his highly intellectual pieces. His literary qualities and unique way of expression helped shape the opinion of the poets and writers of the 20th century. So it had impacted the poets, the writers, the critics. Till 20th century, people recognized, acknowledged, acclaimed, and paid tribute to him. He promoted the concept of self-love in most of his poems. His works influence us to love others unconditionally, no matter how difficult they turn out. It's due to these qualities. He had a powerful influence over many poets and writers such as Robert Browning, we can say, Thomas Stearns Eliot is there, T.C. W. William Butler Yeats is there. He successfully presented his ideas in his writing that even today Writers try to imitate his unique style, considering him a beacon for writing prose and poetry. Still, people follow him. Still, people love him because uh, he has set a different thought. Just so these complex imagery, and we can see in Wasteland 2 and W.B. Yeats' poetry, we can find there. Robert Browning interior monologue is there. So on comparative grounds, we can see a lot of important names and writers later also followed him. So this was basically his, we can say, success, that he got a lot of followers later who wrote on the principles set by him, who completed their work on what he set as a predecessor, as a great writer, that a lot of writers followed suit. Now we see towards his death. John, the great preacher and writer, fell ill in 1624. He documented his illness in his publication, Devotions upon Emergent Occasions. However, after facing the tragedies of life, the prolific figure breathed his last on the 31st of March 1631. He was buried in Old St. Paul's Cathedral. So, some important facts of his life: he was the chief exponent of Metaphysical School of Poetry. He served twice as a member of parliament, first time 1601 and the second time 1614. Although he wrote masterpieces in his life, his collected poems appeared posthumously. Posthumously means after his death, didn't appear in his life. So we can see his poems: The Flea, The Good Morrow, Holy Sonnet, Death Be Not Proud, The Canonization, A Valediction, Forbidding Mourning, The Sun Rising, Holy Sonnet, Better My Heart, 3% God, Song, Go and Catch a Falling Star. So the list is long one, so a lot of other poems, sermons, and the other things that he published, they have been given over there, ones that he had been writing. Some of them were published in his life, and some of the sermons were published later after his death. So this was a brief introduction of John Donne, his life, his works. That's all. Thank you.